Well, welcome everybody to the Simplified Church podcast. We are so grateful that you have joined us today, and we have a exciting episode for you today as we continue our conversation with Dr. Matthew Tanner. So this is the Wounded Pastor Part 2. And so we are so grateful that you are here and excited about continuing this conversation as we begin to hear the kind of the benefits of the strategies that are laid out in Dr. Tanner's book, and then begin to talk through some of the indicators of when healing is coming and when healing has come for this wounded pastor. And we're trying to do all of this in such a way where we don't give away too much of the book, because we do absolutely want you to go and buy it. You can find it at all of the major retailers, or you'll hear a little bit later in the show about Dr. Tanner's website. You can check it out there as well. But I'm super excited for us to jump back in. And so as always, I have Mike Whittemore here with us today and Dr. Matthew Tanner. And so I want us to jump right in, and I want to ask a question before we get into the nuts and bolts of kind of the second half of the book. And I wanted to know, is this issue of forced termination or unjustified termination and forced resignation, is that an international problem, or is it an American church problem?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a great question, and actually follows up on you just segues really good with the last episode. It's an international problem. I've contacted with a pastor in Ireland, pastor in the UK. I'm trying to think a couple of different other areas across the world that it really is an international problem. I think it dives more into those that have the congregational polity. There are some indicators that going to cause this phenomenon to rise based on your polity, your governing structure, that sort of thing. But it's more than just an American church problem. It really is worldwide.
Yeah, which is I don't know. I wish I could say that was like a helpful bit of information. It's actually, I think I'm more sad now that I know that, when you realize that the problem is affecting the church at large, and the problem is ever growing. But you've got these pastors that have experienced this unjustified loss of their job. They've been pushed out. They've been shoved out. And, the one thing that's unique about ministry, Matthew, that I think you'll attest to this, but it's the one thing that people rarely consider, is when a pastor loses his ministry, whether it's justified or unjustified, doesn't really matter. In this instance, when he loses his ministry and he loses his job, he's lost his career, he's lost his community, he's lost his church, he's lost this place that has become a large part of his identity, and not just him. If he's married and got a family, his whole family loses all of that as well. And that is unique.
Absolutely.
That is unique. Like, if I lose my job, my kids still have their community, and they still, my wife still has her friends, and I still have my friends. But pastors, they don't. And that carries with you, even particularly if you were shoved out. And now it's like, well, you're applying for a new ministry opportunity, and you think, man, I really, this is a great opportunity for my family, and I'd love to go serve here, and I'm going to get back on the saddle. And then now that church wants to know more about the last church. And so now you're like, oh, geez, what do I do? So, how do you advise a pastor? How do you equip a pastor to navigate through the unjustified, forced side of this and stay in ministry? How do you do that?
Well, the sad thing is that 65 to 70% of those that go through this forced resignation, unjustifiable termination, won't ever return to ministry again. Many of them have the mindset of, I would rather do anything else than to go through that again. That's largely because they don't heal properly. I myself have been there. There's so many different reasons for that. They want to protect their family, so that they just would rather do something else. So the reality is most don't ever heal. The other issue with that is most don't ever learn real leadership development lessons where they become better leaders. They learn defensive survival skills. And I've actually seen this phenomenon turn leaders into toxic leaders, to where they protect themselves at all costs. They go into a place, if they do go back, they go into a place saying, I'm not going to connect. I'm going to be more of a forceful CEO type leader, because darned if I'm going to let this thing happen again.
Sure.
So many a times it healing doesn't happen and going back in doesn't happen. But what has to happen in order for those to go back into ministry and not be a toxic leader, or not be a wounded pastor, or go in that way. I think you're always wounded to a point. You always carry the scars of it. But to be able to lead again, you have to walk through systematically through the healing process that I've detailed in the book, because the goal is to deal emotionally, spiritually, first of all, to get some economic footing back underneath you, to be able to just survive. But the goal is to get that leadership development lesson, to be able to enjoy the view, get the log out of your own eye. How can I become a healed leader, a stronger leader? And how can I love the sheep again? And not be bitter, not be a bitter, controlling leader? How can I just go in and act as a wounded pastor, as a broken pastor? How can I go in and love broken sheep again? And it's a difficult journey, but you have to systematically go through that, or it just is not going to happen.
So what does that look like then? I know the strategy is detailed in the book. We want people to walk through that, but
Absolutely.
Man, if you've been hurt and you feel like you've just had your whole world rocked and your footing out from under you taken, and now, in spite of all of that, your heartbeat for the church and your love for Jesus and your desire to serve him and serve his bride is still so prevalent that you think, okay, by his good grace, I found this book and I found these resources. What does it look like on the other side? Like, and where are you at on the other side of it? You've written this book. You're putting your whole story out for the world to hear. So I guess in large part, that's a two-part question. So what does it look like for an ordinary guy, an everyday pastor who has experienced this, who is implementing these strategies? What's it look like for him on the other side? And what does it look like for you on the other side?
Well, I'll speak to the other pastor. I think the goal is to no longer be driven by the hurt, the bitterness, to no longer be driven by the anger of it. I go back to the Psalms a lot. It's the second half of a lot of David's Psalms. If you look at David's Psalms, the first half is how long, O Lord, are they going to hate me? How long are they going to attack? All of these very dark thoughts. But the second half is, but you, O Lord, are my hiding place. You are my rock. You are my comfort. In you I find peace. That's the goal for the wounded pastor, is to find that peace that Philippians 4 talks about, that you can go back into ministry no longer ducking every time you hear a gunshot. One of the things that I detail in the book is I coined the phrase post-traumatic spiritual stress disorder. You're no longer diving under the table at the slightest hint of danger. And you learn how to love the sheep again. I think that's one of the hardest things for a pastor that's been through this, is you're hurt by people that should know better. These are professing believers who say the right things, sometimes do the right things, and sometimes I think they truly want to do the right things, and in some cases they're truly saved but misinformed or led astray. But you're hurt by people who shouldn't hurt you. And so the end is being able to choose to forgive, being able to choose to experience peace. You no longer have that swell of anxiety and fear when those thoughts are brought up. It even goes as far as say, is this, you can hear certain names and you don't start to sweat. You don't start to fear when the certain antagonist names are brought up. Those are the type of things you began to feel. And when you began to feel those things, you will know healing has begun and is taking place. Myself, being through it a couple of times, I'm actually in the middle of transition in ministry now because of that very thing. And healing is a process. And you ask, how do you know when you get there? To be quite transparent, I'll let you know when I get there fully.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. I just say this. I think it's a lifetime work of dealing with getting to the point where you realize it's okay to admit brokenness.
Yeah.
It's okay to admit that I'm wounded. And it's okay to do some things to shore that up. With PTSD, you do some things to protect yourself and manage triggers and things like that. And you've got to admit it's okay to be wounded, but yet you can still live and breathe and have joy and be active at the end of it. So I'm kind of getting to that point, but I'll let you know when I finally get to the end of it.
it seems to me that, and this might sound kind of either jaded or crass, I don't know, and I don't mean for it to be, but it seems to me like in the role of pastor, that this is one of those things that's kind of like the person who goes to AA or to NA, and they have to every day get up and say, my name is Greg and I'm a wounded pastor, but I'm seeking with God's help to get better. Like I don't know that we ever really get there.
Right.
And I don't mean that to be a discouragement, but just owning the reality of it's a decision day to day, moment by moment, hour by hour to be able to take steps toward being healthy, to make steps toward overcoming the pain, because there are still people, 20 years into ministry, there are still some people that, like, I have forgiven what they have done, but I can't forget it. And so it wells up within me for a moment. And then I have to say, okay, but God's been good in that. And that's not who I am anymore and not who they are anymore. We've dealt with this. And so it seems to me like that kind of thing is got to become a part of the pastor's life, where we're able to be transparent enough with ourselves and maybe with a few close brothers to say, I've been hurt deeply, but I don't want to stay there. And I'm going to, with God's help, do my best not to stay there.
The sad thing is this phenomenon is a very isolating phenomenon. And it causes you to want to isolate yourself because, we're pastors. We are supposed to have the answers. We are supposed to be the leaders. We are supposed to be the strong men that God has called us to be. And we're afraid to admit that we're broken.
Right.
We're afraid to admit that we're wounded. And that's why this phenomenon of being a wounded pastor, it's so prevalent, but nobody's talking about it because there's that taboo nature of it, of you can't admit you're weak. You're taught don't admit weakness because somebody's going to take advantage of that. Right. But we've got to have a safe place so we can sit and just simply say, I'm broken, I'm wounded, I'm in need of healing. We've got to start being honest. One of the things you brought up a second ago, I think it was Greg brought up a second ago, is when you're looking for that next church, and then they ask you, well, why are you no longer at your last ministry? Every time you have to answer that question, it's a punch in the gut.
Yeah.
That you have to admit, well, I was unsuccessful, or I was forced to resign, and all those fears and thoughts that go through your mind of, well, they're going to think I'm no good as a pastor because I couldn't hack it.
Right.
Almost every pastor that I interviewed, myself included, to a person at some point in this process question their call to ministry. Did I miss something? Am I really the problem? And they get to the point, am I so broken that maybe I shouldn't go back? And so I think you're exactly right. We've got to stop being embarrassed or kind of holding the lid on this, this phenomenon. You bring out the fact of AA. The first step is admitting you have a problem.
Yeah.
You can't get help until you admit that I'm suffering here.
Yeah.
I've said before, everybody's broken. It's just some people show it.
Well, and I think what you're describing, Matthew, is as I'm listening to you, the word that comes to my mind is shame.
Absolutely.
It's shame.
Absolutely.
Because while we're the face of the church and we're the leader of the church in so many aspects, that when we have that taken from us, it just brings a tremendous amount of shame. And that shame drives us into isolation. It drives us into loneliness, and it feeds the narrative that maybe I'm not called. Maybe this was all my fault. Maybe I wasted 4 years, 6 years on seminary and $80,000 in student loan debt.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have, I should never have done this to begin with. And man, if I'd have just listened to my dad, I wouldn't have been experiencing this right now, because, he told me that being in ministry was a foolish idea. Like we have all of these things that pop up into our head that seek to confirm our shame and keep us trapped in it. And to me, that's the heartbreaking part of pastors when they're wounded is the overwhelming power that shame has and what it can steal. And yet we're to be the very ones who on Sundays get up and we preach through the scriptures on ways to deal with shame and accusations from the enemy, right? Like we know this, but when we're forced to experience it practically, we really begin to wrestle. And I hear you talking about the power of shame and its recourse. And so, I would piggyback off of this because I feel like this is something we can't say enough. And Greg, you've said it. You have to get the help that you need. Matthew, you're saying it. But that means if you don't have that close, trusted person, and not everybody does, they just don't. Like I did roughly 6 years of straight ministry where I felt like I didn't have a single person I could be vulnerable with. Like I didn't have anybody because I was out in a rural area. So like, I didn't have anybody. It wasn't until like year 7 that like I met somebody. I'm like, I thought I could really share some stuff with this dude. And we've been good friends, since then. And I've had him on the show. But I think if you don't have anybody, go hire somebody, go to therapy, go to therapy and find someone that can help you process your shame, process your grief, process what you're feeling and experiencing so that you can, because I think my concern, man, is you get this book and you think, okay, it's a glimmer of hope. It's one little tool in the bag when I feel like I've had everything taken from me. But if you don't deal with that shame and that guilt and that initial overwhelming thing that you're wrestling with, then you're not going to be able to implement those strategies.
Absolutely.
It's going to rob you.
I'll be the first to say that because we talked about in the last episode that there's not much been written or not hardly anything written about this. And so this is a start. This is a start to the journey. There's so much more. And I would absolutely echo what you said. I myself have gone out and gone to counseling. One of my really big frustrations is that counseling is expensive and it's not readily available a lot of times to pastors. And one of my dreams with this book is to just connect wounded pastors together, not to sit around and just lick our wounds and say, woe is me, but to have a safe place to share your story, to just sit there and understand with brokenness, understand somebody else that has walked the path, to just hear, to hear and be heard. And when you talk about the shame, that is so, so huge. Going through this phenomenon a couple of times myself, and actually I've been through it twice, 2 or 3 times now, and I've even had people tell me, well, it must be you because it keeps happening. All of these things that cause you to question your call to ministry. What shame did to me, and I don't have trouble admitting this, what it did to me is it caused my relationship with the Lord to be intellectual. I voided out all the emotion, all of the feeling, and every time I would pray, every time I would teach, everything that I would do was an intellectual exercise because I was comfortable competing in that arena.
Wow.
And in order to protect myself, I voided out the emotions of it. And I had to go through some intense work to try to visit those emotions. I talk about the emotional level in the book. And I went to the Psalms and I began to identify emotions in the Psalms, and I did everything that I could to just feel again. And I remember distinctly the moment where I began to start laying down that shame of brokenness and the shame of being wounded. And kind of go back to an earlier question, that's when my true healing really started, is when I dove into those emotions, dove into those feelings, dove into the anger, confronted the shame and all of that head on. That's when I began to heal.
Man, thank you for sharing that, Matthew. Honestly, that I'm a little lost in this moment because I know how everybody's experience is unique, but I can relate. I relate to the intellectual connection to God in order to protect our heart and our emotions. And I think that's going to relate to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
I really do. And so I really value that level of authenticity, right? That was very helpful. And I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I know, Greg, you've probably got a bunch of questions burning here. And so I got to stop talking so Greg can get a chance to do something here.
That's all right.
Because I'm ready to go.
I do have a couple of questions, and they kind of shift gears toward some encouragement. And Mike kind of started pushing us this way.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to your talk is, what would be the encouragement that you give to the pastor who right now is not, perhaps somewhere in their past they were wounded, but they've kind of done their best to walk it out the best way that they knew how. And maybe there's still some things to do there, some work to be done. But what would you say to that pastor who's got the pastor down the street who just got run off by his church, or somebody in his nearby sphere that has just been wounded deeply? What encouragement do you give to that pastor to be an encouragement and to reach out to that wounded pastor near them?
Yeah, absolutely. The companionship, the understanding, the having somebody to sit down and just be raw and real with, you cannot put a value on that. You cannot heal through this by yourself. You might learn some like I said, some survival lessons, or some what I call toxic survival lessons, how to keep this from ever happening, some of those things, but you will not truly heal in this by yourself. And to encourage that pastor that's going to reach out to the one that's just started through it, the first step is economic. Their world is absolutely spinning, is absolutely falling apart. So if you can do some practical things to bring in some resources to bear, just help this guy get back on his feet. But just be a friend, reach out to him. I mean, I encourage pastors, buy this book. Here's my only commercial. Buy the book, keep one on hand, because you will have somebody to give it away to in a short time in your ministry. So just be there, understand that all of the emotions you're going to have to walk through this guy with. Simply just be there, be an ear, be a voice, and be ready to speak into the different levels as this pastor walks through it. But don't stay away from it. Offer yourself, dive into the situation. You don't have to have all the answers to help somebody walk through the healing. That's one of the biggest lies, is that you have to know exactly what to say or exactly what to do. This is where the ministry of presence is just huge, because just like Mike said earlier, when this happens, you feel isolated, you've lost your community, you've lost your identity, you've lost all of these things. I can remember one time when I went through this, I ended up relocating, and I went to a church, and the best thing that happened was the pastor of a church that I just started attending. He knew my situation. He let me be a member. He said, you just sit there and heal. He would take me to coffee and just listen to my rants and my raves and my anger and all of the different things. He would pray together. When he introduced me to the church, he would say, this is a friend of mine that's going to hang out with us for a while. He didn't identify me with the problem that I brought. He just let me be there. And all he said to the church was, this is a man who needs healing. We as a church are going to surround him. We're going to help him heal, and we're going to send him back out again. That's what we're going to do. So he led his congregation even to rally behind my family. They were so great with my daughters and my wife, but they didn't need to know the situation, but they just became my advocate to just help me walk through one of the most difficult times in my life. And it was just, I felt in a situation where I had no other friends, at least I had one person that just gave a darn about my life, my family, and my situation. There was no grand advice. There was no strategy he helped me work through. He just cared. So I would tell that pastor, especially pastors, if you know what this is like, you've been through it, and you see somebody else go through it, put yourself in that situation, go to that person, find a way to reach them, and just give them a safe place to recover and begin to redirect their steps.
That's beautiful, man. Wow. Do we need to put the church's name in the comments below so that all these dudes can find a refuge there? That place is like a camp in the wilderness, man. It's just trying to escape zombies. Get there.
It was such an oasis, man. It was such an oasis in the desert.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful. Greg, you had a second question.
So my second question, similar in scope. What do you say to that pastor who, man, last week the deacons meeting hit and they told him you need to find a new place? So what's the biggest encouragement that you can offer to him? I mean, aside from, hey, buy my book because it'll help you, but
right.
But what's that next just word of encouragement that you give to that pastor who is on the front side of walking through this?
Yeah, my initial gut level reaction to that might be surprising. In the initial storm, there's really not a lot that you can say that will honestly be remembered. The reason I say that is because life has just been turned upside down. There are so many more questions than answers. And that really is, it's kind of a cliche, but it's really not. It's where the ministry of presence comes in and just sits somebody to sit down and say, man, I understand. I get it. One of the things that I've done, because through this, I've connected with pastors as it's happened. I didn't try to say anything because sometimes all the noise, the first advice that people give you, this may sound terrible, but sometimes it's just not good. It's people trying a little too hard to help. People say, well, you know what? Just trust the Lord. It's going to be okay. And in the mind, the pastor is sitting there going, no, it's not going to be okay. So avoid one thing you do. I will say this: avoid the cliche answers of God's got a plan and things like that. And I know that sounds terrible for me to say, but when people would tell me that, my first gut level reaction was, I know he's got a plan and it stinks right now and I don't like it.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that is, that's not really what we're equipped with in Scripture. What we're equipped with in Scripture is to bear one another's burdens.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where they need to go with it.
We got to just bear the burden, man. And bearing the burden isn't trying to offload it very quickly with some really terrible, crocheted sign that gets hung in a kitchen, The Lord's got it, or just let go and let God.
I use this illustration that what a pastor needs to do in that situation is do what Job's friends should have done.
Yeah.
Job is sitting in the ashes. He's mourning and weeping. He's lost everything. And Job's friends come up with all of this advice. Well-meaning. I'm sure his friends loved him, but it just didn't help Job at the moment. What pastors need at the moment that this crisis happens is somebody to just sit in the ashes with him. Get down, sit in the ashes, mourn and weep with him.
Yeah.
There will be time for advice. There will be time for help later. But at the initial crisis point, just get down in the dirt with them and just bear the burden and just sit in the ashes.
Well, man, Dr. Tanner, that's exactly what you've done in writing this book is you've put your story on display and you've invited other people into the ashes with you as you've navigated pain and hurt and these wounds of all the dreams that you thought you were going to have and all the plans that you had made. And man, to experience that and still walk away, not just believing intellectually that God is good and that he loves you and that he's not finished with you, but knowing it in your soul is a testament to the goodness of God and what can happen when these strategies that you've laid out in your book are implemented. And so that's why we want to really encourage guys to get this book. That's why we had this conversation. That's why we did 2 episodes, is because we just believe in this. This growing phenomenon is growing. And I think probably, 4 to 7% is probably too low. Because if I had to guess, there's a lot of those mutual terminations that existed that weren't very mutual, that a lot of them were very much forced or pressure was applied. And just to save face, we said it was mutual. So if I had to guess, that number's probably a little bit low, but
yeah,
I think this conversation was really important to have. And man, I really want to have you back. I want to have you back on the show.
Absolutely.
To talk more about this, to see how God's using this project and what's happening, especially if you keep moving forward with writing more resources and adding more opportunities to your website. We want to have you back on the show because I think this has been helpful. And so thank you for the time and energy and the work that you've put in. Thanks for sharing your story with us. And if people want to get more information, they want to buy that book, they want to connect with you, where can they go do that?
Absolutely. And first I want to say thank you guys for this opportunity. This has been a joy to just sit and dive into some of these things and have the conversation. If you want to get a hold of the Wounded Pastor, contact me, share your story. If you've been a wounded pastor, share your story with me. Go to woundedleadership.com and you'll find all the information you need about me, about the book, about the ministry, and grab the book on that website. Everything's right there. woundedleadership.com.
Fantastic. And we'll have more information on social, Facebook for you guys, on our website as well. Wherever you get access to our podcast, we'll have links in the show notes for you, all kinds of great opportunities for you to connect and get this book. And so on behalf of Greg and the whole Simplify family, thanks again, Matthew, for joining us and being a part of this journey. And man, we can't wait to see what the Lord does with this incredible work that you have done. So thanks for being here.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. It's been an honor.